Hello and welcome to another lap guide for the iRacing Camel GT series. This week we're at Circuit of the Americas. Here's the lap first. All right, lap time there's a 1:58.93. So for this lap guide we're using default morning weather. So an 85 Fahrenheit track temp. Let's go ahead and jump through this now, turn by turn in more detail. Okay, so coming into turn one. Breakpoint for turn one is really right about where you see the heavier kind of skid marks prior to the white line that you have across the road there. So there's about an 80% or so threshold brake that you're looking at that point there. And you want to probably be a little bit careful with coming out onto the curbing a little too much. That can cause some traction loss issues with more fuel. This is with qualifying fuel, obviously, so you can get away with that a little bit better. But you can actually, in some areas, I'll talk about that further on in the track, where you may want to actually adjust your line just a little bit differently when you're running race fuel. And of course, in your race fuel conditions, you're probably going to be backing up your brake points maybe just a bit with the heavier weight of the car, and if you get any warmer weather than this. And so I think on average, we generally will see even cooler temperature than this in morning weather. But it could still even be warmer than this. So I think we saw typically, actually there was one session where I think we had 88 and 88 Fahrenheit track temp, I think it was. But most of the races and practice sessions that I've looked at were actually cooler than this, so you can actually get a little bit better lap times. All right, so coming into turn one, you want to kind of start with this wide entry and kind of come across as you crest the hill here. You don't want to come in too tight. I actually did clip just a little bit too much curbing. You want to get pretty close to it. But the way you approach this apex is to really kind of late apex it and come off the latter part, or the latter white and red section here, pointing toward the downhill there. So you really want to avoid taking too much. I actually took a little bit too much, and you'll see the rear end bounces around a bit here. Luckily, it didn't unsettle the car too much. Was still able to get to throttle, but you want to be careful with that. That can definitely send you into a spin there as you get back to throttle. So you want to get pretty close to that, but look at kind of coming down off your turn. So as you kind of come up over the crest of the hill here, as you start to turn in, look for a turning radius that kind of gets the car coming across this really at the latter part of the corner. And of course not getting too too close to that. But you want to be picking up throttle just as you cross that and just come across that apex, coming back to throttle. This is a first gear corner, so you're going to be very, very gradual on throttle, and just ease on that as you straighten the car out. 50% or so or less as you kind of come up to the car getting kind of straightened up and balanced. And there's going to be a upshift into second gear right at that point. So let's go ahead and play that through at speed. So coming around turn 2 and 3 and 4, just all full throttle. You can kind of open up your entry just a bit. There's not a whole lot of time to do that. The amount of speed that you're going to build up coming down this hill will be pretty quick, and so you can come out closer to the midpoint of the track, but even then you don't necessarily need to. Car gets around here relatively easily, although you don't want to be too aggressive. You're going to maybe be a little bit too hard on your tires if you're not straightening out the line as best as you can. So always try to straighten out your line just for the sake of your tires, and to try to keep your speed up. You can be pretty aggressive with the amount of curbing that you take here. I focus on just using the red and white portion and try not to cross over into the solid red, just where you're going to get into trouble with off tracks. And still full throttle all the way through, and kind of setting up to the midpoint of the track. Some people like to set up a little bit wider. I'm totally fine with just kind of coming down to the middle here, and I feel like I can pretty accurately get my left side tires pretty close to this bump here without touching that. So that should be your mark, is to kind of get down into this corner, turning to the left just as you cross, kind of a gradual left-hand turn, and getting real close to that curbing there coming into the S's. So before we get into the S's here, let's go ahead and play this. All right, so this is all about hitting your marks and keeping your speed up. So what I like to do, just to maybe keep a consistent rhythm through here, is I'll downshift into fourth, just at or just prior to the first curbing here, and just kind of light braking. You'll see just maybe 20-30% or so, very light braking, and then getting back to throttle right away, and then modulating throttle. One of the things that you'll do quite a bit throughout this track is you're going to really steer the car with throttle, and you're going to manage the understeer versus oversteer that you have at various points of the track. And in some cases, just a little too much throttle will send you into an oversteer, a spin on corner entry. And so I'll try to touch on some of those areas where you really want to be careful with it, but it's vitally important to use the right amount of throttle and modulate that throttle to keep your speed up, but not induce too much oversteer. So there's going to be the downshift into fourth and turning. You really don't going to get too far over to the right where you're already going to be back to the left. Another light brake, 20-30%. Down into the third now, and then again just getting as close to the curbing here as you can. You really want to just kind of keep it tidy, and keep your speed up. And I'll keep it in third gear through the remaining turns 6, 7 here, I believe is what they are, turns 6 and 7. Again, there's another curbing. You really want to get as close to that as you can. Modulating again with throttle, based off of where you feel the car reaching as far as your target marker. What I'm actually looking to do here is come all the way up to the point where my left-hand tires are actually getting pretty close to the white line. And as long as you aren't crossing all the way up over the white line, you're not going to get an off track. And actually ran maybe a little wider here than I like to. You can actually take just a little bit more of that. And the reason for that is that it helps you get set up a little bit better here for turn 7. I came in a little shallow into turn 7, and you'll notice I actually clipped this curbing just a bit. My line was just a little bit shallow. I would have liked to open this up a little bit, and to do that, you really actually just have to come in a little bit tighter, or maybe a little bit later apex to get over to the right. You can actually get all the way up pretty close to the red and white curbing here to the right. And in cooler weather, I actually just leave it in third gear. You'll notice that I downshift right here into second. But in cooler weather, I can actually carry more speed through here, and there's no need to downshift. I just keep it up in third, and just keep it all the way in third gear, all the way to the end here. All right, so let's play this section through at speed. So just maybe a quick note is looking at your marker as far as where you want the car to be is real important through this section of the track as you're modulating throttle and you've got a feel for the position of your car. You really want to modulate that throttle based off of how much the car is either oversteering or understeering into that direction. But you'll notice that the steering angle is actually pretty constant. So I want to back up and show you this, because as I come off this final corner in turn 6, the steering angle is actually pretty steady. I don't adjust that much at all, but you'll see most of the adjustments happening with brake and throttle, because what I'm doing is as I'm coming across this corner, I'm looking at how far over I want to get the car on this last bit of corner to set up the next. And again, looking at that mark where I kind of want to get the left-hand tires pretty close to this white line without crossing up over that to avoid the off track. And by doing so, I will be lifting on throttle or modulating throttle and even tapping the brakes just a bit, because I felt myself running just a bit wide actually, so that's where I ended up tapping the brake. So you're not always going to be braking there, but in my case it's really kind of a balancing act of just modulating between brake and throttle to try to get the car positioned and hitting that mark as accurately as possible, and then of course committing back to throttle once the car has come off the corner. So just play that last 2 bits here back at speed. All right, so once again around turns 8 and setting up for turn 9, pretty similar here where I'm actually aiming to get the left-hand tires pretty close to this white line. And oops, let me show that a little bit better. I think I hit this one a little bit better, and that's pretty dang close to an off track. I think that's really right up on the limits of how much you can kind of cross up over that, but that demonstrates the line that you can take through here. And as you get the car over to the right hand side here, it really opens up turn 9. And so you can see that as I'm already approaching turn 9, starting to turn left already right here, and maybe just lifting a bit on throttle right as I hit that apex, and then back to throttle right after that. But you can really carry a lot of speed through here if you hit this just right. And that's pretty close to that curbing. Any more than that, it gets a little bit rough, but that's about as close as you want to get to that curbing there. And then of course your goal should be getting back on throttle just as you cross that, and letting the car track all the way out wide, using all of the road there to keep your speed up. Let's play that through. All right, turn 10, cross the curbing there. Now turn 11. The break point for turn 11 is maybe just past this white line, kind of where you can see a darker shade of curbing here to the right. So there's going to be a threshold brake of about 80% right at that point. And then downshifting all the way down into first, keeping the car out wide a bit. You want to be kind of patient here on turn in, although you can kind of angle in toward the center of the track, but not quite all the way to the middle here. You can just see me kind of coming out maybe on the inside third of the right hand side of the track, and then angling in. You want to use all of the track here. It's a pretty tight corner, but you want to get close to the curbing and let the car track all the way out to the curbing as you start to ease on throttle and keep the speed up there. So the goal here as you get down into first gear is that as you're turning in, you're not feeling too much understeer. If you're feeling a lot of understeer, you probably didn't slow the car enough. And if you're obviously if you're still braking hard here, that can also result in a little bit more understeer if you're braking too much before the apex. So you want to be kind of rolling through by the time you get to the apex to the point where you can pick up throttle just after you cross that. Still very, very heavy steering angle. And so as you kind of gradually unwind the steering here, the car should be reaching the curbing on the outside. And of course you can now commit to full throttle and up into second gear. Let's play that at speed. All right, coming down into turn 12. So once again, with qualifying fuel, I feel pretty safe braking all the way out into the curbing here. But with race fuel, I don't like to, just because there's a higher chance of a lockup as you come off onto the curbing here. And then if you lock up, you end up running way wide here and late for your turn in as the car kind of slides and doesn't slow enough. So for qualifying, I feel like I can get a little bit more speed through here by just using a little bit of the curbing. And my threshold, and I actually was a little sloppy. You'll see me kind of brake and then return to braking. This was, I think, just for my second practice session, so I was a little sloppy here with my braking still. But it was a little early. The 100 is really more of a better brake marker. So this white line is actually pretty close to that as well. So if you target an 80% brake right here, you'll be just fine. 80%, you'll notice here I threshold a little bit early and then came back and then back on, but it would have been much smoother if I just hit my good 80% threshold here and then gradually eased off. As a downforce car, just to reiterate something that I've mentioned in the past, is that your best and your most efficient braking occurs in the initial braking zone, where the car has a lot of downforce pressing the tires to the track. You're going to have more efficient braking early in the braking zone, and so you're going to brake hard initially, and then you're going to trail off from there as the downforce falls away, and of course the grip levels also fall away with that. So you can definitely slow the car much more efficiently with hard braking initially. So coming down, you just want to be patient on turn in. You're going to get all the way down into first gear. And you can come across, and you can clip this curbing a bit. I've even clipped it a little bit more than that, and it still hasn't unsettled the car too much for getting back on throttle. But I think if your goal is just to kind of clip the edge of the red and white curbing, you're going to be just fine here. And then as you come across that, getting back to throttle, coming all the way out to the red and white curbing on exit, and then up into second gear, as you now want to immediately get the car over to the left-hand side coming off the exit. But let's play this at first at speed. All right, so getting all the way to the left immediately, you really want to get the car set up for your braking in a straight line where it's settled. The balance of the car is settled. You don't have too much going on as far as left to right weight transfer. As you reach the curbing here to the left, there really isn't a great marker for it as far as where you start to kind of brake. Maybe you could look at the skid marks here where they begin in the asphalt. That's probably where you could begin to brake. I'm actually starting to ease into brakes just before that. You could look at it as maybe about a 50% brake. Now you don't have to downshift into first here. In fact, I think that I still do, just because it's out of habit and just out of rhythm here, but I really don't need or use first gear. You don't want to be very heavy on throttle through this section of the track. But as I brake and then downshift into first, I think that maybe prevents me from carrying too much speed. Maybe the temptation to carry too much speed into this corner, because you really want to avoid too much speed into this corner. You'll see some very light trail braking into the corner. The car's going to continually slow as you reach the apex. Took a little too much here, but it was okay. And then the car's just kind of naturally going to track out wide. And then just very light throttle here. And this is another point where the steering of the car is very much controlled with throttle. And the more throttle you give it, the more it's going to oversteer. And so getting past, I think anywhere past 50% or so throttle is pretty risky here, and it'll spin. With the amount of the rake and the rear spring stiffness that I'm running in the setup, It helps a lot in areas where you can have issues with understeer, but it comes with at the cost of areas on the track like this where it can really punish you with some oversteer, throttle oversteer, and a spin. So you really want to be careful with the amount of throttle that you feed in here. Just real gradual. And oops, like I said, I could have just kept it in second gear and just kind of gradually eased around. There's no real need to be down into first gear because I'm just giving it very, very light throttle. And it might be simpler just to leave it in second gear and just kind of keep a nice steady pace around here. Coming across this curbing, in more recent lines, I typically take more, get the car well up over on top of this curbing, and it's safe to do that. It helps a little bit with opening up the entry into turn 15 here. What I want to do as I come into 15 is I don't want to be turning too heavily coming into 15 because this is such a long corner that as you're turning, there's so much weight transfer to the outside that as you come across this corner, it's almost like the car won't stop turning. There's so much weight on those outside tires, it's just going to continue to turn on you, and you may find yourself spinning on the exit of this corner. So to avoid that, I like to get the car settled on entry first to make sure it's not a long, continuous turn where there's so much weight transfer to the outside that it overloads the outside tires. So kind of focus on getting kind of a straighter entry into this point. You can get a little wider than I did here, and I think the reason that I didn't get a little bit of a wider entry is because I didn't take as much curbing here as I could have. And so as I turned the car in at this point, taking a little bit more curbing would have helped me get out just a bit wider so that I could straighten it out. And actually, I wouldn't have used this curbing here. I would have kind of been a little bit, I don't know, another car length or so, car width to the right here, and then braking a little bit further wide and straightening it out, and then of course turning in and getting pretty close to this. Try to avoid using much of this curbing. It can unsettle the car and can delay your throttle on exit. You can feel it kind of bounce around, and again, very stiff rear springs that will increase or cause that to be even more severe. Let's go ahead and play back from this point at speed. All right, so coming off of turn 15, just real gradual, let the car track out wide. Make sure you're cautious on throttle and that you're not feeling an oversteer. If you, this is, like I say, this is the point where you carry just a little bit too much speed, and if you're turning hard with a lot of weight transfer to the outside, right as you get on throttle here, you may find the car just continuing to turn and continuing to oversteer into a spin on the exit. So be just very cautious on throttle there, especially as it's in first gear as well. All right, so setting up for turn, let's see, 16, 17, and 18, I think it is. Coming all the way out to the red and white curbing here, get a nice wide entry to the corner. And what I'm looking for at this point is, again, steering with throttle a bit, modulating that. And there's actually kind of two apexes that I'm looking at. This is the first apex, this steeper portion of curbing coming out. And I just want to come across that. And this would be the second apex. And this one, you don't necessarily need to get up onto that curbing. You can run a little bit of wide of it, but you really want to make sure that you're not coming out too wide. If you're coming out too wide here on the outside, then you're just taking a much longer route, and of course the shorter distance is a straighter line, and so the closer you can keep it over here to the right, I think is quicker. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm coming off the curbing, letting the car stay about to the midpoint, close to the midpoint. Don't apex in too soon to the first red and white curbing. You want to stay wide of that. But as the car comes in, really just using this curbing as an apex, you want your goal to be to cross over it. And so getting, and I could actually probably use, I could have used a little bit more than that safely, but I just want to make sure to hit that mark. So you can see my slowing of the car a bit as I get that, and as soon as I know that I can hit that mark, you'll see me start to kind of get back on the throttle a bit. I even drag the brake just a bit, and that can help a little bit with rotation, just kind of dragging the brake pedal a little bit if you feel like you're running a little wide. Even though I'm on throttle at the same time, I'm just kind of lightly dragging the brake pedal a little bit to kind of help a little bit with rotation at the same time. Back to throttle, and then of course as I come across this next apex, lifting just a bit. And again, notice that the steering angle is going to it's going to stay relatively consistent throughout this corner. Very minor adjustments to steering. Most of the adjustments is going to be is with the throttle. So playing that back through here at speed now, just kind of pay attention to the steering angle and the amount of adjustments with throttle, and that's really where you're going to control your steering angle the most. And I think you'll also find that if you try to overcompensate with steering, where you feel the car understeering, and so you feed in more steering input, you're gonna tend to overwork the front tires, and that's going to catch up on you as you come into the following corners. The front tires are overworked, overheated, and they're going to be even less effective, and you may experience even more understeer. So anyway, playing that through at speed. All right, so coming down into turn 19. So for turn 19, I like to get right up on the curb and maybe even touch the green surface here to the right lightly. It's pretty close to an off track, but I like to use all of that curbing to help open up my turning point, or the angle that I have into turn 19. So the turn-in point is really right at about the midpoint. So right as you maybe cross, and maybe it feels like it straightens out a little bit, right at about here is where you want to be turning in. There's about a 50% brake as well. So there's going to be a quick downshift into third, turn in, and your goal here should be to just cross the orange curbing section, and it helps keep your speed up, and then the car is going to track out wide. And this is actually about the limit. Oops. This is about the limit on the exit prior to an off track. So you can cross up over into that green surface safely without an off track, but that's real close. So that really kind of helps show exactly where the limits are on the surface. But you can actually take a little bit more here, and so if you focus on just maybe lightly crossing over the red and white curbing here, coming across the orange curbing, and again running out wide, and then maybe even crossing over briefly, then you can do that without an off track. But it is pretty risky, and that is pretty close, especially if that's in your qualifying attempts to cut it that close. So let's play this at speed. All right, so coming into the final corner, the brake point is right at about where you can see this pathway or access road come in. 80% brake right at that point. And again, using all the red and white curbing, you can come up into the green surface a little bit, but this is another point where very hard braking can result in a slide, and you'll actually feel the car kind of pull left as you get more traction on the left than you do on the right. So with more fuel, you may want to be a little more cautious, or maybe not brake quite as hard, where you're actually going to tend to lock up and slide on the right hand side here a little bit more. But I was able to get away with that in qualifying fuel. So in any case, you can use all of the red and white curbing here, and I like to use all of it because it helps open up, again, the corner here. The turn-in point is just past the white line, so kind of just as you cross the white line, starting to turn in and aiming to reach or touch this orange painted curbing here. Ran a little wide of it. Could have actually cut that a little tighter. This corner I almost always tend to just I try to carry maybe a little too much speed into it. The problem with that is that you delay your throttle, and this is before it's a decent passing zone. It's not the longest straight on the track, but you get a good exit here. It's going to help set up for qualifying lap to get a good run off your first lap, but it's also going to set up potential passing attempts, and you can lose a lot of speed if you're late on throttle. So your goal should be to get to throttle. Think of it as an early apex, and I'm actually getting on throttle right here already. So I'm on throttle already. Early apex, this is your mark here, the orange painted curbing, and you should be easing on throttle from here on out, running all the way out to the red and white curbing, and of course full throttle all the way up the straight. So let's play that through at speed. All right, there's a lap of COTA. Hope you found it helpful, and I'll talk to you later.